everybody here okay? I mean, we got a nice PA there. So welcome to Earthlife Workshop with Rosemount Nursery. You can ask for a better day, can you? So how many people here have heard of Earthlife without reading the book? Yep. How many people use rock minerals themselves? How many people, keep your hand up, how many people know why you need to use rock minerals? Perfect, excellent. That's the best I've had in a long time, so we're on track. So my name's Colin Johnson, I work for Earthlife. I've been working with them for only a couple of years now. Gets a little confusing because I work for Colin 1, I'm Colin 2, so if anybody needs to talk to me, I'm C2 and he's C1. See him first, see me second. But I've actually been using the products for about 15 years. It's a little bit, my story ties in a little bit with the story of how the minerals were developed. So the first thing I did was I studied horticulture in the 90s. I did Cert 2 and Cert 3, did Cert 3 and then Diploma in Horticulture. But at the time they were teaching me about fertilisers, they were teaching me about chemicals. This is what you need to grow plants. There's 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 elements to grow plants. So I was being taught about urea, sulphate of ammonia, superphosphate. Of course, being me, a bit of a greenie, plant nut I like to call it, I put my hand up and said, "Excuse me sir, how does that forest grow without us running around throwing fertilisers and manures?" He said, "You're not here to learn that, you can do that later." So I did. See, that was in the 90s. At the same time we had at the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, there was a report presented on mineral depletion on agricultural soils around the world over a 100-year period. And so from the 1890s to the 1990s, Australian soils were 55% down on mineral content at what they had been 100 years previous. So here we are, 26 years later, 27 years later. Well, where are we at now? 60 plus, I suppose, but I think they stopped counting back then. But of course, nobody knew what that meant. They didn't know how to quantify it. They didn't know how to qualify it. They didn't quite know what to do, so they sort of stuck it to the back of the report. But meanwhile, you had companies like Earthlife who were thinking, okay, there's something in this because we know the minerals are to do with nutrition, not just for us, but for plants as well. So yeah, we can have basic nutrition, but they tell us to have our supplements, have our multivitamins, have our this and have our that to get but it's not a balanced diet, but because those minerals are missing out of the soil, then we have to supplement that. Well, the same is said for plants. Because the minerals are missing out of the soil, then you have to supplement them as well, and that's where fertilisers came about. It's quite basic what minerals actually do, because to get to the nitty gritty of it, when you have your DNA is there and it has to replicate itself to create the organism. Well, it communicates with the RNA. The RNA then tells the cell what to do, what to make, gather the amino acids together, bind them together, make the proteins to form the enzymes that then create the metabolic processes of life. Thing is, those amino acids are bound together by electromagnetic force. That electromagnetic force is supplied by the minerals. So when you take the minerals out of the equation, those amino acids can no longer bind together, so you start to lose essential proteins, you start to lose enzymes. Those functions then fall apart. So when you're supplying only this many minerals, you're going to get this many functions, but when you're supplying that many minerals, then you can get more functions happening. So that goes from above the ground and below the ground as well. So one of the other things that when Earthlife started investigating the minerals, they had a look pretty much at how the forest grew, which was my question, and investigated it. So while I've got my hand up, meanwhile back out there, they're actually looking at it. So not just the minerals, but the biology, it's the soil biology as well, and the fundamental energy in the soil as well. So when you take the minerals out, then the biology can't function properly, and when the biology can't function properly, then the system falls apart, and then you end up with dead soil. So what they are able to do is actually create something that can then actually supply that to the soil. But back to my journey when I was in Ipswich. Anybody ever lived in Ipswich? No, good. Oh, I thought I owed somebody some money. No. So yeah, old 100-year-old mining town, well, 100-year-old paddock that was basically subdivided. But before they subdivided, they took a metre of topsoil off and sold that to the golf course, and we were left with this. So heavily compacted. So you had old cow paddock, but soil that not only was it solid, you could literally make pottery out of it if you got that way inclined, but slamming the mattock into it and then rip the mattock out, peel that clod off, and here I am, a budding plant collector. You know, my grandmother was down in Bedesert and she'd take a cutting off the peach tree, shove it in the ground for her snapdragons, and when they died off, the peach tree started to shoot. You know? So, but that was, you know, going back 50, 60 years, and those, you know, you still had a rich soil back then, even though it was suburbia. But now it's all heavily depleted and literally dead soil. So at the time too, we were coming into around about 2003, 2004 on level 5 water restrictions down in Ipswich, coming into level 6. So as gardeners, we were under the spotlight, you know, stop using, you're the ones wasting all the water, whereas, you know, we won't go into that, the scars have healed. But here I was being told you can't waste water, you've only can use it every second day in even houses and every second day on odd houses, and yet the plants had to go home and had to be watered constantly to establish. So I found this product at one of the nurseries I worked at, and I thought, oh, dirt, lovely, excellent, what's that supposed to do? And they said, best clay break you'll ever find. I said, oh, bring it on. So he said, pick your worst bit of clay that you've got. And I said, okay, all right, then what? Dig it in like gypsum? So he said, well, no, just throw it over the top. So I said, well, how does it differ from gypsum? Well, back then I didn't actually know, but I threw gypsum around my clay and it did nothing. It sat there for 3 years and did nothing. I found out from a farmer's handbook from 1909, which I had dug up in the estate when my parents passed away, and they hadn't, in 1909, they hadn't even used gypsum in Australia yet. So, but they mentioned a Professor Hilgard in the States and how he was having good results with it on saline soil. So I looked this guy up, and he was doing the studies in the 1890s for gypsum on saline soils. So it was converting what you call black alkali or sodium carbonate into white alkali, and that makes it into a form that it can then be leached out of the soil. But it has to be pure, it has to be extremely fine, it has to be solubilized. So you have to drench the soil, then you have to put the gypsum, and then you have to drench it again to get everything out. And of course, who's got that much water, especially when we're under the spotlight? So I figured, well, I don't have I don't have sodium soil, I don't have saline soil. No wonder it's not doing anything. So it wasn't reacting to my soil. So they had the same problem in the Western Darling Downs when they were developing this product, and that was the black sodic clay out there wasn't really responding because they didn't have the water to flush through the paddocks. So it was actually getting worse and worse. So they worked out with the combination of the minerals and the biology, it's the biology that creates the enzymes to make everything happen. So when that happens, and then that organic matter that is in the soil, it breaks that down, and then you start to get clods forming. So here I was being told to tell people put gypsum out for clay and compacted soil and organic matter. Well, you take the gypsum out and put the organic matter, and that will do most of the work. Very slowly, but it will happen. Whereas if you add the catalyst, which is the minerals and the biology, it speeds the process up. So I've chucked it down over the top of my soil, and he said, just give it a bit of water. I said, do I have to soak it? Because it looks like rock. He says, well, it's not water soluble. All that does is wake up the biology, and then they become your gardeners, literally. So I thought, okay, I'll humour him, because it's pretty rough soil there. And so do that, lightly moisten it, put a bit of mulch over it. So then come back in 3 weeks. So, yeah, okay, nice, 3 weeks, sure. All right, so I did that, pulled the mulch back. 3 weeks later, that much of the clay had physically crumbled and I can scratch it with my fingertips. So I'd never seen anything like it. Okay, there's something in this natural processes that actually works. No wonder the forest is surviving. So even when it's times of drought, because the biology and the minerals and the humates are all active doing their thing, it's keeping that crust from forming, the hydrophobic crust, which is the big problem. When that forms, that's when even a 6 mil of rain could fall, but it doesn't get into the soil, it just evaporates when the sun comes up. Whereas if you've got the crust open, 6 mil of rain could potentially go down, you know, even, I've had 6 mil of rain overnight and scratched away and it's actually gone down an inch, so just in the poor soil that I've got. So that, and of course I said, well, as a powder, I mean, you're throwing that around, that's actually spreading it for you. One of the reasons they don't prill it or turn it into a pellet is that quite often when you're pelletizing something in the process, it can actually destroy the biology in that. And the other is that most things take up to 3 weeks to start breaking down and activating, whereas in those 3 weeks I've already broken my hydrophobic crust and then I can do things after that. So I thought, okay, well, let's see what the process is. That was about half a kilo a square metre too, so 5 good handfuls. Because you really got to kickstart the process. If I just took a bit and went like that, it's not going to do anything because it's all really going to just blow away. So go heavy, and then 6 weeks I did it again, about half a kilo. And then for the next 12 months, I did it every 2 to 3 more doses after that. And by 12 months time, I'm digging that with a hand trowel because it had worked its way through. So I didn't have to dig it, used very little water, and then all of a sudden my heavily compacted rubbish clay was all of a sudden starting to grow plants. So that was my introduction into the secret of breaking up compaction by using the natural processes. So what I figured, so I basically thought, because the other problem we've got is with compaction is that even if the soil's not too bad at the top, so the other problem we've got with compaction, if the soil's not too bad at the top, generally we'll have a level of compaction under the soil. I know a lot of people who've got sand and they can go down between 30 and 100 mil or 100 centimetres and they'll eventually hit a level of compaction. There's something there, you know, there's still that subsoil compaction going on with a lot of soils. And of course the problem with that is we dig the classic hole nice and wide and put some lovely soil in it, plant the plant up, and then the plant just hits the hole and goes, yeah, I'm not doing that, I'll just run along the surface, thanks, because that's where you're putting all the fertiliser for me. So then all the plants run with their roots that way. So when it's really hot and really dry, of course, those roots are all up there where it's hot and dry. So no matter how much water you're putting in, they're struggling. So I just thought, okay, we've got to cut back on the water we use. And no matter, you know, with the roots up there, we're pumping more and more in. So I decided I'm going to change the way I plant. So I did a slightly narrow hole and a little bit deeper. Then I put a couple of handfuls of the minerals in the bottom of the hole, made a bit of a slurry with it, put the plant in as normal then, and backfilled and put some more around the top. Then gave it a good soak and then I walked away. And I didn't touch it until I could actually see the tip starting to wilt, and then I gave it another good soak. And then that was nearly a week before that happened. And then I didn't touch it again until it started to wilt, and that was nearly 2 weeks. And this is in April, May, so it was coming into the cooler weather. And then by the third watering, they stopped wilting then. I had 6, it was bottle brushes, so callistemons, and the only ones that really wilted after that were what we call the viminalis. They're the real soft leaf ones, the creek ones. So they wilted a little, but then by the 4th watering, 6 of those got watered, the rest didn't. And then by the following summer, they were established and there was very little water. So I figured that's done exactly what I wanted it to. Instead of the roots running that way, they've hit that, it's broken up the subsoil, and those roots have gone down this way, so where it's cool and moist. So now they're no longer relying on me to look after them during summer, they can look after themselves. Now I've got acreage in the Gold Coast hinterland. I should say the foothills of the Gold Coast hinterland, because when I say that, everybody goes, oh, beautiful soil up Tamborine Mountain. I said, no, I'm down the foothills where it's crowbar country, thank you very much. So it's cut into a valley, in the end of a valley, so some of it's like that, some of it's like that, some of it's like that. Now the previous owner terraced it, but he didn't retain it. And it was a bit of a wasteland. He just grew something the neighbours called organic coriander. He knows what I'm talking about. So all he had was a couple of dangerous dogs and some cows up the back, fenced off. So took 12 months for the helicopters to stop flying overhead, but they worked that out. He wasn't a gardener, he didn't do anything. He just had a couple of patches of lovely soil around the ridge line underneath the wattles with 3-inch ag pipe. So that was it. So everything else was heavily compacted and not terraced. So when we had Cyclone Oswald come through, it dumped 16 inches of rain in a very short period of time, as in a day and a half. Well, I had landslips all over that property. There was just dirt sliding everywhere. It was a bit of a nightmare. So anyway, I've been pumping the rock minerals around to open that soil up, planting to get the roots down to grip the soil. And here we are 5 years later, well, 2 years ago now, and Cyclone Debbie came through and we had 22 inches of rain in the same period of time. So 6 inches more rain, showing my age here, so but 6 inches more of rain and not a single landslip on the whole property. So I'd cleaned it up already and built it, and I didn't terrace it. Still left it, but just did a lot of planting and a lot of minerals. And what I found too is there was a dry gully running through the bottom of the property, and it was filled in back when we were actually on water restrictions. I saw the aerial photos from 2006 and you couldn't even tell there was a creek there. So they'd filled it in, but then it started raining and wash out. Then I started to get little pits of water actually recharge in the creek. So the water that was coming out of the hill was flowing through the soil and following the natural contours under the soil where it's supposed to. And then the plants could draw into that, and then they could tap into that instead of me having to run around, because I couldn't anyway because I'm on tank water. So it's like, I've got to drink, you've got to look after yourselves. So by doing that, I've got about 90% success rate through even the driest and hottest periods now. The only thing that really wilts is the couple of plants that are on a rock shelf, and that's probably as much the heat of the rock than anything else. So not just breaking up compaction around that, but also getting water to flow through the soil as well, getting oxygen. And when you get that, you get the biology's able to then do its thing and build up, because it's the biology that has the communication with the plants. As going back to the start, once the biology disappears, the plant then, to get that plant to grow, it relies on you. So you have to give it your NPK, you have to give it your water, your wetting agents, all that, your seaweed stuff, all this sort of thing. You have to give it that to get it to survive. So but once you get the biology back in the soil, then that plant goes, oh, hello, I think I like this. And then it's sort of, you walk out and look at, yeah, I'm good, thanks, I can handle this at the moment. So it's actually handling the conditions better. And as you build that up, then you find that it gets stronger and stronger and better, and all of a sudden you see other things not affecting. So you get things like, the classic was getting back to the horticulture course when they were teaching me about NPK. Now I said, okay, well NPK, what about other elements? Isn't there other elements? Well, that's the main three that you need. Okay, how did that happen? Well, in 1846, you had a professor in a chemistry lab, took a philodendron leaf, burnt it to ashes, sifted through and said, okay, these are the major elements that are left over. We need to get that in a water-soluble form so the plants can then take it up and grow. So you had nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. And then they had others, magnesium, manganese, iron, etc. When I studied, calcium was an interesting one because it had one sentence in the book, and it finished that sentence by saying there's not really that much, it's not really depleted in the soil, or it's not depleted, but the more I looked, the more I found that calcium actually makes more sense to a plant than NPK. So everybody take a deep breath, you're breathing in 78% nitrogen. So the plants have always dealt with that nitrogen, and also out of the plant matter as well, through the biological actions. I mean, people say when they smell our stuff you get a little bit of ammonia. That's actually the natural ammonia that the plants tap into. So that's not a chemical. It's chemical, it's not a synthetic process that creates that ammonia. If there's any questions, you throw them at me while I'm talking. Might need to take a breath from time to time.
Yeah, your lawn blend contains 4% nitrogen. Where does that come from? Is it the rock minerals or?
Yeah, the question was that the lawn blend contains 4% nitrogen. So the most we have in a natural product is about less than 2%, and that's from the organic matter that's in there. For the lawns, we stick a little bit of sulfate of ammonia in just for that extra boost. So we're actually adding like a supplement just to boost the natural food that's in there. So because with the proper bacteria in the soil, it can tap into that that nitrogen that's in the atmosphere. And with phosphorus, potassium, well, that's generally found in a mineral form as well. And then the plants actually then can tap into that, because the other thing is with the water-soluble fertilizer, when you put that on the plant and water it in, then the plant then gets to take about 20 to 30% of that before it actually leaches out of the system. So 70 to 80% of that fertilizer you put in there actually washes away. So, and of course then that all runs downhill into the creek system, and that just feeds the macroalgae, which can cause eutrophication, which when the heat rises then you get fish kills. So that's another reason that it's something that I was against when I saw it. I thought, well, you know, the forest doesn't need NPK. You're not running around with bags of fertilizer. So how does it happen? Well, that's how it happens. So that biology, and that biology can function properly with the minerals in it. So so then I started experimenting with this here. This is Garden Delight. So this is based on the rock mineral, and then you have natural humates. So that there is literally green matter composted down. That's why I call that proper compost. If you're looking at compost, that's what it should look like, because that's readily available for the plants to use straight away. That's broken down to that form in about 8 weeks, but that's by pumping it full of biology, and that's the biology breaking that down. And because that is in a form that's not water soluble, there's no harsh chemical reaction. So if you take this and put it down on a rose, the rose can take what it wants out of that. If you take this and put this down on a grevillea, the grevillea will take what it wants. You take it and put it down on a banana, the banana will take what it wants. Because it's just forming that natural pool of elements in the soil, we liken it to what we call a balanced diet. So this is how they grow in the wild. If you look at the multivitamin ads, you'll always see multivitamins, everybody's running around happy, but at the bottom does not replace a balanced diet. They'll have it on the bottom of every ad. But they don't tell you that on the back of the fertilizer, of the NPK. You don't say this will replace, it does not replace a balanced plant food diet. So, but what this does is then that gets there's actually over 60 minerals in it as well. So there's way beyond what I even conceived of being actually used by plants. The more I look into it, the more research I find that people are investigating into the actual minerals that are in there. So, so this is literally creating an environment now, a good environment. So we put vegan friendly on there. So any vegans? You've got a fertilizer, a natural fertilizer. No manures, no blood and bone. Once again, the forest does not grow in concentrated manures or blood and bone. The only plants that grow in concentrated manures are in a cow paddock, and that's grasses. And even the cattle won't eat that until it's broken right down. So once again, that's another thing that is pushed, which it's a waste product. They need to get rid of the waste products, and that's what it is. So, but it's a little known fact I found that it's actually manures and blood and bone are under the Biosecurity Act as restricted animal material. So unless they're treated, packets of manure and blood and bone have to have a warning on it. So you can't actually use them around ruminants, so cattle, sheep, horse, goats, llamas, the likes of that. And there are warnings, anybody who's got a horse will not spread manures around their paddock. Well, they shouldn't. Even some of them mention about dogs as well, a bit dangerous for dogs. See, manures and blood and bone can carry up to 150 different pathogens have been identified. You get E. coli, salmonella, listeria, all of those found in manures. So you buy a packet of lettuce and you've got a recall on it saying it's got salmonella in it. It's not because of the lettuce. Somewhere in either the growing process or the packing process, there's been animal waste through there, basically getting in through the system. But once you get the biology into that, that breaks all that down. So the fresher the manure, the more you should chuck this in. So if you've got a fresh manure source, I'd be chucking that around that to break that down, and that makes that lovely and beautiful for that. I'd mix some plant matter in that as well. So then you've got a balanced diet for your plant. So any more? Yes?
So I use the garden mate all the time. I use it every season. Should I then use the garden delight as the fertiliser?
Yeah, well, the question there was, lady uses the garden mate and every season,
Yeah.
every season, and should use the garden delight as fertiliser. Well, absolutely, because you're not getting the organic matter, and plus there's triple the biology in the garden delight as well, so that can help speed things up. So especially sandy soils. Anyone with sandy soils, because you put the organic matter in and it just sinks and the sand keeps coming to the top. You've got to bind those particles together, and it's the biology that takes the organic matter and the enzymes and acids it releases literally start gluing the particles of soil together to form aggregates. So once you get that in, then you actually start finding that you're getting soil loam even starting to appear. So cool. I've told him he does have to buy me dinner now. So that's getting that in. So it's in conjunction. I mean, I started with I've got a big bin of garden delight, and I mix the two together depending on what I'm planting. So for example, I've got acreage. It is land for wildlife, but also I'm a rare plant collector. I've got trees from all over the world on that property. I've got trees from the African savanna growing near trees, from tropical South America near trees, from southwestern Western Australia. I've got a snow gum growing in subtropical clay. All because I'm getting the minerals in, opening the soil up so the water can flow, but then the plant can take what it wants out of that. As long as you get that in to open the soil up. And because each plant, so for example, some of the eucalypts I grow come from Western Australia up on rocky ridges, so very low organic matter content, very low biology, but good rich minerals. So I will put, say, 3 parts garden mate, 1 part garden delight, for example. But then if I'm growing something, I've got a tree that's only found in one place in the world, and that's in a crater in Hawaii. Not where it snowed, apparently. I don't know if anybody saw it snowed in Hawaii recently, in Maui, but so it's only found there. So that's a more tropical, rich climate, so lots of biology and lots of minerals. So I will do about a 50-50, maybe 3 parts garden delight to 1 part. Same with grevilleas. Most grevilleas I'll do probably 3 parts mate, 1 part delight, or make it easier. Just use this. This is really a 50-50 mix of mate and delight. Once again, we label it vegan friendly, no manures, but no chemicals in that. This is the one I like to use a mix on pretty much everything, because this here there was the Lockyer Valley Junior Landcare out Toowoomba Way, and a gentleman used these products, Mate and Delight, for the children's gardening programs, up to about 160 gardening programs, because there's no contaminants in it. The kids could eat it if they want. You could rub it in there, can throw it at each other. We just told them, we didn't tell them it'd make you fart, because they'll probably eat more. So, but this was come about because one day Greg said to Cole, can't you just put those two together in one bag? Because I'm using both of them. Put them in one bag for the kids' veggies. And Veggie Mate was born. So this pretty much goes on everything. So I will put this on my roses and my grevilleas at the same time, and each one takes what it wants out of that. But it's only if it's a specialist plant that I want to really play with that I'll mix it up. But once again, no fertiliser in that. Now, I was on Facebook one day, or actually answering a message. Someone had asked me what was the best thing to use on orchids. So at the time I said, well, I either a Vegemite or Garden Delight, and they asked, what about Flower Blend? I said, well, I didn't really use that because it's got the chemical fertiliser, a little bit of chemical fertiliser, just a small amount, and I just kept that away from the bare roots, the likes of my Vandas and my cats. And I turn around and my partner's sitting at the other end of the lounge chair looking like this. I said, what? She goes, I just went out and threw Flower Blend over everything. Orchids, broms, everything, the whole tropical garden. I went, oh, okay. Well, my cats went from that big to that big. Other orchids then shot 2 flowers instead of 3, instead of 1. One of them, which flowered 1 flower every year, then all of a sudden shot 5 or 6. My cymbidiums started flowering in 35-degree temperature. I didn't need a 10-degree drop. All of a sudden, these plants had just gone, yeah, I can finally grow without you, sir. You just sit back and enjoy. And as that developed, then I noticed a few things too. The main thing I noticed was less bug issues. Because that was the thing I tried to avoid. Having land for wildlife, I didn't want chemicals, didn't want to spray because, I'm cut into a rainforest conservation park, so I've got this crazy amount of bird life coming through. So that's when I noticed, okay, I'm getting more and more butterflies, but I'm getting less and less damage on my veggies. So I started to have a good look at that, and I already learned that when you use high nitrogen, because as soil scientists tell you need high nitrogen for your leafy veggies, can't grow them without it. So I showed him a few pictures and he sort of stopped talking to me then, but anyway. So I said, well, the problem with nitrogen, chemical nitrogen, is it stretches the cell like a rubber band. So that cell stretches and that cell wall weakens. Now the first process in the cell is to create simple sugars. The simple sugars go to photosynthesis. But when the cell walls weaken, they leach out. Now you've got what you call Lepidoptera, which are your caterpillars. They take those simple sugars to create the energy so they can then grow. So they love it, absolutely love it. You get your sapsuckers. They, like your scales, whiteflies, that sort of thing. So they suck the sap out to get those simple sugars. Now you'll always see ants. Why are these ants on this plant? Because they're farming the scale and the aphids and those, because those take the simple sugars out, take the sugars, take the simple, and then excrete the complex sugar, and that's what the ants go for. But they can only do that when the pressure of that sap is low. So when that plant is just growing, they can suck that out no problem. But once you raise the metabolism of that plant, that sap gets stronger, and that bug then finds it harder to get the sap out. So it's got to spend more energy getting the sap out than it's actually getting out of the plant. It's like you're starving, absolutely starving. I'm going to run down to KFC. You get there, the doors are locked. You've got to spend a lot of energy to get in there to get something to eat. More than you'll actually get. So chances are you'll then go somewhere else and look for somewhere open, and that's what the bugs will do. So very, very simple. A lot of that comes down back to what I said before about the calcium. Calcium actually inhibits elongation, so the cell stays nice and round rather than elongating, and then it thickens the cell wall up as well. So as that thickens up, you get those simple sugars go to photosynthesis rather than the bugs, and as the photosynthesis builds up, all the metabolic actions then also build up as well. So then the only problem, of course, then is grasshoppers. Grasshoppers take complex sugars as well. So they are a bit of a curse at the moment. Probably if I said who's got grasshoppers, you'll all probably put both hands up. Interesting studies they've done in agriculture recently, when the plant gets a good source of natural silica, and the silica levels build up in the cell wall, then the grasshoppers actually blunt their mandibles when they're trying to chew. So as you build those silica levels up, then you get less and less grasshopper action. But still, it takes a little while to build those levels up. So for me, my veggie patch, it took 2 or 3 years before I noticed no even white cabbage moth was flying around, but it wasn't bothering my veggies. My cycads weren't getting chewed anymore. My crinum lilies weren't getting chewed anymore, so I wasn't actually having the problems like that. So then I could actually start to enjoy my spray-free veggies finally. So,
So if you've got availability of lots of horse manure, that sort of thing. Could use the garden mate with horse manure to create the nitrogen.
Yeah. The question was if you've got a good supply of horse manure or any manure really, definitely add the minerals to it and the biology. That'll break that down properly. Problem with something like horse manure in particular, it can become hydrophobic because it is literally grass. It's just gone straight through the system. So it really needs to be composted well with biology to stop that from happening. So if you just take horse manure and dig it into your soil, it can actually become detrimental. So then the other thing I noticed, I saw all the blueberries out there. Who grows blueberries? How many pH tests do you do? Lots. So now the other thing I found with looking at pH, if you look at that classic pH chart, that was developed in a chemistry lab. So that's a soluble chemical availability at certain pH. Now I've got some blueberries that I put in. Now what the biology will do will adjust the pH in these products, will adjust that pH to around neutral, but that doesn't mean you can't grow blueberries, you can't grow camellias, you can't grow rhododendrons. Now rhododendrons are a classic because there's a very interesting document where a lady was studying rhododendrons and why are they growing in the limestone hills in the wild in China and North America when they're supposed to be acid-loving plants. Well, first of all, they're not acid-loving because if you poured hydrochloric acid over it, it's not going to love it. So I want to get, that's a myth I want to bust now. Let's get rid of that term altogether. But she found, as she progressed through that, she found it was actually the minerals that it was sourcing out of there because the exudates from the plant roots can actually alter the pH around in that immediate area, determining what minerals they want. In the 50s, they took some rhododendrons in pots, in Scotland it was, and they fed it magnesium carbonate. Carbonate's an alkalizer. They got the pH from 5 to 8, and the plant showed no toxicity symptoms. What they found was it was loving that magnesium. Now, if you look at the classic pH scale, at a pH of 5, which is what they're supposed to like, magnesium is not readily available. So I think their heads blew up because of that, but fundamentally that showed that was a soluble form, whereas it was able to get that. So as long as the plant can get the minerals it needs, the pH is less relevant. So my blueberries, I don't bother with pH. A really good example of that, we were up in Toowoomba there a few months ago. There's a gentleman up there who grows champion roses, and we got there and he's complaining about his pH is 8.6, and he's tried our product, it's not changing, he's tried this, he's tried that, and you go up and his roses are beautiful. They're champion roses. And so, well, why bother? The plants don't care if it's 8.6, why should you? They're beautiful, you know. So they weren't struggling, they weren't suffering, they were getting what they wanted out of the minerals. Now, who grows roses here? Do you have to spray them a lot? No? Good, yeah, yes. Do they look all right? Yeah, perfect, excellent. Do you use our product? Oh, okay. You can go now. See, I only grow a few roses, just ones that I grew up with, which have a bit of sentimental value to me through my parents and relatives. So when the neighbours heard I was going to put roses in, they said, you can't grow them because in the valley you get the moisture come up the valley every morning and deposit over everything. So the orchids love it, the bromeliads love it, the tropicals love it, but they said you just can't grow roses. So I put the roses in, pumped the garden mate into it, and as they flashed up, they took that calcium and silica up in particular. See, calcium, once again, has that, it's a double edge with the fungus. See, fungus, the spores land on the leaf, they throw out their hyphae or taproot, produce enzymes, which they call pectolytic enzymes, which then break through the weak cell wall. So when you've got a strong cell wall, they've got to produce more enzymes to break through, but also calcium inhibits those enzymes as well. So you've actually got a double edge against that by getting high levels of calcium into the plant. So as the new growth flushed up, all of a sudden no black spot. So the spores are there because the very oldest leaves have got black spot, but that's its role in nature, is to break down weak cell walls and return those nutrients back into the soil as part of the process. You go up to a rainforest, it's full of fungi because it's breaking those nutrients down. and returning to the soil. If it's on new leaves, it's because those cells are actually weakened. And same with bugs. If you see bugs on the new leaf, it's because that is not, it's actually got weak cell walls, even though it might look good. Lawn grubs are classic. Pump your lawn fertiliser, your high nitrogen in there, quick green, bang, lawn grub comes through and eats it. Why? Because the cells have stretched, released all those sugars, and they've just had a field day. So as you get the mineral-based lawn food in, it's like the lawn blend, then so you've got the mineral in there plus a bit of lawn fertiliser. I think you mentioned that before, the 4%. We have professional turf growers who ask us about the 4%, so we just say try it. And one of my favourite endorsements is down in Freeman's Reach, west of Sydney. They grow 15 hectares of Sir Walter buffalo, and they put half a tonne of this down post-harvest to break up the compaction and also build the biology up to strengthen the against the likes of the frost that comes through as well. So when people say, is it good for Sir Walter? Well, Sir Walter's just a grass, it's just very well advertised. So that does a very good job with that. So that there, once again, it's just literally rock minerals with a bit of fertiliser in it.
While we're at that, you've got the granules and the dust. Does that need to be fairly well mixed, as you put it?
Yeah, does it? Yeah, exactly. Does it need to be fairly well mixed? It does, because it will settle on top. So as you shake it up, just like your sand and your organic matter in your sandy soil, the coarse runs to the top and the fine sinks to the bottom. So it does really need to be mixed up. But yeah, like all the products, how do I apply it? Grab it, throw it, water it, go have a cup of tea, job's done for 3 months. So it couldn't be anything easier than that, really. So that's, and so that lawn blend then fills that, it breaks that compaction up in the lawn, gets the roots of the grass growing down. There's actually, I don't know if you'll be able to see this, but one of my favourite diagrams was a lady in America who studied, she studied root systems of prairie plants. I don't know if I can see it either. But there's, I don't think you can really see that, but see, these are plants that are 2 to 3 feet tall, but those root systems drop down anywhere up to 15 feet down in the soil. So that's the American prairie plants. And so you've got, millions of buffalo used to go through there and tramp all that, eat it, take it out. And once they've migrated on, all that shoots back up because all their roots are down here, so they're not getting ripped out. But then you get, what they're growing now, Kentucky bluegrass. That's your root system on your classic grass. So very shallow, but that's because they're heavily compacted. So that grass roots should really be able to get down, but they don't because that's part of the growing process. So when you do your own lawn with that, that will actually get the roots able to go down further into the soil and then encourage the runners to grow. So the leaves will come as the runners grow. So you'll always get more leaf when you get more runners. So then you get a thicker lawn. And then of course it's full of calcium and silica, so you get a strong lawn. And generally within we like to say around about 3 years, you can start finding that, okay, the lawn grub's not hitting me anymore. I don't have to come out and spray it. It's eating my neighbour's place instead. So if you use our stuff and the neighbour doesn't, then do take him on in a lawn competition, because we do have a lot of winners winning their carton of beer at the end of summer. So then once that's done, then also they find that they don't have to break up the thatch anymore, because that starts to break down as well. I don't think we do have another product, just bear with me 1 second. So conveniently called breakdown, but what this does is, as I said back with the bacteria, it produces enzymes that break down the decaying organic matter or compost. This is literally the enzymes they produce in concentrated form. There's no living bacteria in there. I tell that to people, so you can be confident it won't blow up on the shelf on a hot day. But when you spray that over the soil, if you took that and sprayed it over your lawn, it doesn't affect your lawn at all. But what it does, it breaks the thatch down. So then as that breaks down, that restores those nutrients back to the soil. Because you know, thatch, when it becomes really dry, it becomes hydrophobic. And of course, it doesn't matter how much you water, it just sits on the top. And then when it's really wet, it actually starts to rot, and that's when you get your fungal problems in your soil. So your thatch is really your worst enemy, but by getting that over, you speed up the processes of what the biology would normally do in there. So you've got that biology with the minerals, and that then speeds up the process. They actually use it here too.
So your product is a mineral base, but it's also got the biology.
Yes.
So how do you develop the biology? Is it a compost process, and you're taking, what's the product?
Well, the question is, how do we develop the biology? I don't think I'm allowed to tell you that. They were able to source it, the actual relevant soil, bacteria and fungi, and culture it. And they developed the technology to be able to, that was the hard part really, is how you get it in there so that it literally comes back to life. It's not dead, it's just static. It's like any soil that's dry, the biology is just not active. So, and then of course as it breeds, then you get offshoots as well. Then you also get other biology start to work in with that as well. Classic one is nematodes. Everyone thinks nematodes, I mean there's something like figures from anywhere from 25,000 up to 1 million different varieties of nematodes in the soil and in us as well. But there's only about 10 of those that are actually detrimental to plants. So anywhere up to 999,990 might actually be beneficial in the soil, because they actually keep the balance of the bacteria and fungi in the soil. So they prey on that and then keep a balance. So it's an ecological process. So when you're putting a nematicide in the soil, you're actually not just taking out the bad ones, you're taking out the good ones as well. And that goes with any spray. You know, when I see, sorry, yes?
I've got a lot of green frogs.
Yes, green frogs.
If I use those two together, it's not going to impact on the frogs. Eh?
No. I have, last count, upwards of 15 varieties of frog, and that's what I use. See, who's got bromeliads? That's one of the only fertilisers that I've ever used on bromeliads, because you can take it, throw it straight over the top of the brom, walk away. I like to give it a bit of a water, because in the wild, that's how they grow. The leaf litter falls in them, and that then breaks down through the enzymes that are actually in the plant. But that's literally how they grow in the wild. So I've been doing that for years, just chuck it straight. I've got about 200 different varieties, they just go straight over. So I actually get good colour, even in heavy shade, out of my broms as well. And then the frogs can live in there as well. So I actually also use this in water plants. Once again, there's nothing water soluble in it, so it doesn't leach out, forms the nutrients in the soil. So I put that in. I actually use something just like a bricky's loam, because it's got sandy loam, and put a heap of that in. And I've got a thing called stargrass, which I got from Melbourne Flower and Garden Show a couple of years ago, which the water plant guys up here say you can't grow, and yet mine grows and flowers all year, every year. So I'd say keep using this stuff, fellas. So because then you're not, and then the life gets in the water as well. You get the life, you get a little bit of algae bloom at start, but then it starts to balance. The question, yes, can you use it on succulents? By all means. This is where I get the balance. I actually would probably use 2 parts mate to 1 part delight. Maybe 3 to 1, because your succulents are generally lower in humates in the wild. They're from a drier soil, less biology, less organic matter in there. More organic matter, the more prone they may be to rot with fungus. So you'll actually have more like that. Generally what I will do, I'll have probably 2 to 3 handfuls. So you can't overdose it, that's the best part. You don't plant straight in it, because it's not a media, it is actually an additive. So yeah, so that's what we're doing. How are we going for time, guys? Yep, is that good or bad? Yeah. Yes, potted plants. We have quite a few wholesalers use it in their pots, because what it does is stimulate the roots to grow. One of the secrets to what they call the plant conditioners, the liquids you get, is generally acids, the humic fulvic acids for starters, but you know, and that's formed as a part of the biological process. So that will stimulate the roots to grow, but also condition the potting mix. So you get less collapse. Even if you do get collapse, it doesn't actually go to glug at the bottom. You're getting technical there with glug. So yeah, I mean, at home with the pots, I just go around, same with the broms. That's why I love it, because I can chuck it on my pots, a couple of handfuls. Say if you've got a 500 ml pot, maybe 2 handfuls, 300 ml pot, 1 handful, and then I can just broadcast it over everything, and then job's done for 3 months. So I just go and then I can just go and watch cricket. So
Which one do you use on pots?
once again, that comes down. I like to use, well, more so the Garden Delight, but some of them I like to hit it with the flower blend for that. And if I want to go really hardcore with some things, I got the fruit blend. It's the only one I haven't touched on. You'll see that's like the the lawn blend. It is a mineral fertiliser mix. This was sort of developed with Orchardist for, once again, that quick hit of fertiliser, just to get the processes boosted, would be the term I like to use. So the metabolism is there. Classic example is I got some pawpaw, and they're growing up beautifully. Few little spots on the leaves, but fundamentally they're not being affected by any viral infections or fungus on them. But nothing, just nothing. So it was bisexual, so you had both flowers, male and female, but still nothing. So stuff it, grabbed a bucket, a couple of big handfuls, about 5 handfuls around each one. And then within 3 months, I had little fruit start. So I got my first crop, they're about that size. And now I've got my second crop straight after, and they're just now starting to develop a little bit bigger. Same with my bananas, they just wouldn't set fruit, but I pumped the fruit blend in, and away they went. Now I've got room, I've got acreage, so I just let the big clump grow. And so instead of trimming it, and I just let the clump go, and I've had bananas, I had three bunches before Christmas, and I've got another 4 bunches now developing as we speak, so I just keep it going. And apparently my banana bread is to die for, but yeah, it doesn't last. I bring it up, but it doesn't last, so sorry about that. So any more questions?
Yeah, I've got another one.
Yes.
For a subtropical garden in general, with bromeliads and that sort of thing, and Australian native, what would I use?
With subtropical and Australian natives, so if you talk to me about natives, is it tropical natives, subtropical natives, Western Australian natives, is it high temperate natives?
No, I call them the roast man.
Oh, okay. So, but that's the beauty. You don't have to specify really if you use something like your Vegemite on them. So if you do that, it doesn't really matter what it is. Subtropical, I do like more Garden Delight, because the higher humate, the higher level of biology in there. And then that way they could just take what they want. So that's actually my Melaleuca on there. So, and that's the Garden Delight. So that's what I first started using. I only changed because I was starting to grow things that's not supposed to grow on my subtropical clay. But now I've got eucalypts from all over Australia growing there, so including a beautiful snow gum, which still I keep pinching myself how this thing gets beautiful new flushes of growth in 35-degree weather, and yet they should be up there somewhere. So giving it what it wants, it's taking it, and taking it well. So yeah, so that's pretty much what I like to hey, wait. Do I have an open garden? No, sorry. No, my other half would kill me if I said there was a bus coming. See me down there locking the gate and with the shotgun at me, not at you lot. So no, not at the moment. There's a lot of work to do. So yeah, so maybe in 5-6 years like that. But yeah, if I do, I'll let them know. So but yeah, it's basically made life so much simpler and so much easier. And I mean that's our model is that it is that simple. You know, once I got past, I call it the indoctrinated dialogue of what I learnt in horticulture, what you're trained to hear. This is what everybody says. Oh, what's this deficiency? Oh, look at the leaf. Well, It's a metabolic breakdown. Grab some more minerals, bang. Not, oh, it's magnesium, oh, is it iron, is it this or that. It's a metabolic breakdown. See, those minerals could be present in the soil. It's just the plant can't access them because the biology is not there for access. So it's not necessarily deficient. So nitrogen deficiency, well, you know, there's 78% in the atmosphere, so it shouldn't be deficient in the plant. Just the plant can't tap into that resource. So once you get the minerals, the biology, away it goes. We do have a plant that I'd like, it's so simple to pot up, which we will be giving away as well. So I hope you like a bay tree. Bay tree. So really, because they're fairly slow growing, you can grow it as a pot plant. Big problem I had when I was in the nurseries was scale, big chunky scale, and you get that here. Yeah. So I just started pumping the minerals into it, and the funny thing with it too, I noticed with plants, it was at another nursery where I introduced it, and they had their roses there, which they were getting rid of half price. And I said, look, put them out the back, give them a bit of a trim, put the minerals on them, and see what happens. Well, he rang me a week later and said, Cole, what the hell? All the leaves are falling off. I said, slow down, it's all right, just call me again in another week or two. And anyway, 6 weeks later, they sold them all at full price again. So basically because the plant, no, that leaf is weak, so it's like the plant just aborts it. So I don't need you anymore. I'm not going to repair you. I'm going to put my energy into growing new leaves. So that's what it does. So when you actually, what you find is quite often the leaves will actually literally drop off, and then this new flush will come up. Once it starts to grow healthy leaves, that doesn't happen then because they are a healthy leaf. It can use 100% of that leaf instead of 20 or 30% of it with poor cell structure. So very, very simple. So with the bay leaf, I look at, okay, lovely green leaf, but because it's got the scale problem, it can get the scale problem. I'll use something with a bit more of the mineral in it because that'll help strengthen. Once it starts to grow up, then you can move over to the Garden Delight to really feed it and get that extra greenery into it. So, yeah, that's just a base potting mix. Yep, very simple potting mix. All I do is basically just put a couple of handfuls in the bottom, but get a good handful. Actually, I'll do 2 handfuls because it's slightly bigger. Mix it in a little bit more. So it doesn't matter that it's exposed, doesn't matter if the roots touch it. And then just pop the plant out. I give it a little bit of a tease but not too much, just to wake it up, so to speak. And then I'll just put a little bit more, sorry about your tablecloth, Denise. A little bit more, another little layer. And basically that's layering the minerals, so make sure it gets through the whole thing. You can actually, if you have potting mix and put it in a wheelbarrow, just dump a bag in there and mix it up. It's a quick way of doing it. But if I'm only potting up a couple of plants, and that is a little bit below so the water doesn't come off, and that is basically it. And then a little bit, well, a lot around the top. And what that's done there is that has pumped, so that's 4 handfuls through, which is really just a 7-inch pot. So might sound a lot, but that will give that the best possible start.
So that was garden mate you were using.
That,
The Vegemite.
yeah, so yeah, that's Vegemate. So that's got a little bit of humate in it, but it's predominantly the rock mineral. Because I really want to fortify that plant to start to get it a good, and that'll encourage more roots quicker.
Can you overdo the garden mate?
No, we had a place that what they did was they had everybody know what the Angiopteris fern is? Big giant fern that grows in Fraser Island in the creeks. So loves water, but it has to flow like sandy soil. Anyway, they had a clay area they wanted to put it in, but really hard, very hard to dig. So they said, Apparently this Garden Mate, this is when they first started stocking it, apparently this Garden Mate's pretty good. They had 7 bags which were busted, so they just unloaded a whole 7 literally on it. And within 5 years, they've got this massive Angiopteris, which is a understory plant growing in full sun in solid clay. So it just went, I'll take that, thank you very much. So if you do accidentally spill the whole bag, sharpen up your pruners, that's all I say. So technically no, but it's, you know, yeah. Initially, like I say, with breaking up your subsoil or your clay or your compaction or your sand even, or improving that, start heavy. Give it that first dose to kickstart the process. Do it again in about 6 to 8 weeks, heavy, and then you can cut back to 1 to 2 handfuls every couple of months, general maintenance, just to keep things going. If you start to see bugs, put a bit more on. I bought a 4-pack of tomatoes once, not that long ago, last year actually. Put them in, a couple of handfuls of Garden Mate in the bottom of the hole, then backfilled. I put a little bit of Veggie Mate over the top. They all started to grow, but the third one looked a bit crinkly and a bit wrinkly, so gave just a bit more. They all started to grow again, and that one then started to get still a bit crinkly. So I had a look, went into the cage. I've got to have my veggies in a cage, otherwise the wildlife would take it out and I wouldn't get anything. But went in there and I grabbed it, and a whole heap of whitefly swarmed off it. So my horticultural brain went, whitefly, get the spray. My other part of my brain said, you idiot, just pull it out, throw it on the compost heap and feed the other ones up. So I did that, and I had 3 beautiful tomatoes and no whitefly anymore. One of them must have been genetically weak. You go back to what I said at the start with the DNA, instructing the RNA to replicate the cell. If the minerals are missing, that cell will actually be faulty. And that's how faulty cells get produced, because they're lacking the minerals, and that's why we have to substitute our minerals in our diets, because it's missing out of our food. Same thing in plants. So you've got a faulty plant for whatever reason, and the whitefly, it just would not take that calcium up, so threw it away. Whereas the other 3 tomatoes gave me beautiful, the best aromas I've ever grown. So yeah, instead of running for the spray, all Garden Mate. So really, really, really simple.
Any of your products have a limited shelf life?
As for shelf life, not really, no. As long as they stay sealed. Some of the bags, which we are changing shortly, the old agriculture bags, the bacteria does like to eat its way out if it sits for too long. So they do fall apart. But generally, I don't leave it on the shelf long enough for me to find out. I just keep going through it. I actually have a big bin full of Garden Mate and a big full of Garden Delight and a little bin of flower blend for the missus, and mix them and throw it around. So, but because the biology in there is static, it needs moisture to activate. Generally, unless it gets moist, it's still not, and it's going to be in an anaerobic environment, like stuck in the bucket. It may have a shelf life, but we haven't really found one yet. But yeah, the idea is that it works better in the ground than on the shelf. So. Sorry, do we have the mic at all? Or?
So she's just saying, by using the Earthlife products, make everything that's got worked well with the oil. Yeah, fisherman's delight, she said.
Fisherman's delight. Well, actually, funny you should say that, because I know quite a few people who use it in aquaponics. They put it over the growing media because once again the minerals go through the system, get locked up inside the media, and also anything that flushes through into the aquaponics tank, the fish love it. The only thing is you have to keep it aerated, because the biology in that is aerobic bacteria and needs oxygen. So once it goes in water, it will die, and that will take the oxygen out of the water. So, but then the anaerobic biology in the water will then thrive on the extra minerals as well, and not grow too much out of control generally, because it does help the pH. I put it in all my ponds, even put it in my fish tank. I actually mixed it up in the shell grit for my Gouldian finches, and they just love, they wolf it down. So they're getting minerals as well. I mean, for us, it's a bit different. I mean, you could eat it if you want. It is a bit gritty, tell you that now. Actually, yeah, okay, I did, hand up, I did try some. But we don't have the actual enzymes in our system really to break down rocks in our system, whereas a lot of animals do. You know, in the wild, they will actually chew on clay to help their digestive system. So part of that is to get the minerals into their system. So my birds absolutely loved it. So there's a little bit of a side business there, Colin. Oh, see, how do I have time to work? Because I use this. I chuck it down, water it, jump in the car, drive off. I can go down to Melbourne for a week and a half, come back, and I know even though we had 35 degrees, the only thing that I needed to get water was my veggie patch. The trees up on the hill just look after themselves. You know, and January, 2 mil of rain in the month, at the start of the month. So the rest of the month, 35, 36 degrees every day, at least. That stinging sun as well, not just the sun that I seemed to have when I went down to Melbourne. It was hot, but it didn't feel hot as I get back to Queensland and it's hot. But you know, it's still got a bit of crisping up on a few things, but because their roots got down, they're able to look after it. So yeah, that's also why I don't have an open home. I mean, as in, you know, an open garden, because I actually don't have the time to clean it up that much. But that's it, I'm on the road and the plants can look after themselves because they've got their balanced diet around their roots. So it's probably going to start getting dark shortly, so we should look at probably drawing a raffle or two. Oh, yeah, so sorry, quick question before.
And do the ants, which seem, my lawn's covered in ants.
Yep.
Do the ants love that stuff, or does it persuade them to?
Well, ants, you know, they like to build the mounds. They're trying to create a hydrophobic environment in the soil because they need it dry. They need it cool, but they need it dry. So as you put that through, that breaks the soil up and encourages the moisture to go in. So you're actually creating an environment they're not happy about. So they'll generally then go next door. Yeah, or move into your wall cavity. But yeah, so it does actually help with that as well. And also the ants also feed off the bugs in the garden as well. So if you reduce the amount of bugs that are in the garden, you also reduce the amount of ants there as well. So yeah, you can create an environment. Like the lawn grub, it does take a bit of time because they'll try and fight you at first, but it does actually work in your favour. Cole mentioned the Nepenthes. Anybody know what Nepenthes is? That's the hanging pitcher plants. I grew them along my patio because the mosquito problem, because Land for Wildlife, for me it's all about frogs around the house, so I just have a small above ground swimming pool, which is a frog pond. I have bathtubs, I have pots, so it's all just water everywhere. But so the Nepenthes were there for mosquito control because the mozzies just go in there, and of course the enzymes in there break that down. Now, get your umbrella up. Was that rain? Yeah, it's beautiful. But so they're an understory rainforest plant, Nepenthes, so they need shade. Now I put mine on the edge of the patio before I really knew what the sun was doing. So what I found was as winter was there, so they're growing along there, and the sun in winter's there. But as summer came, so I got there in March as the sun was starting to dip behind the house, and then the following summer it came over here and just slammed straight into them, full sun. Now I got a bit of leaf burn on them, so I just pumped the Garden Delight into them, being a full tropical plant, full tropical food. And then the new flush started to come out. Each flush came out stronger than the last one. So within 5 years, I had to chop them back by 3/4 because the house was so dark because of the jungle outside the window, and they were harbouring tree snakes as well, so which were eating my frogs. But yeah, I ended up doing a garden club talk in Sydney for the Tropical Foliage Society, Sydney Tropical Foliage Society. And I sent a query saying that I'm growing Nepenthes in 43-degree sun, which is what it was that Christmas that I took the photo. And the guy came back and he didn't say the word bullshit, but he actually implied it. Turns out he wrote books on Nepenthes. He was an expert, an actual world expert on it. Gordon Cheers, his name is. Anyway, so I sent him the photos. And next thing I'm doing a talk and explaining how I can do it. And here's the photos. So these plants not only adapted to taking the sun, they craved it. They actually threw their flower spikes out above the gutter into the sunlight. So now I just put them wherever, but obviously something like that, if you put it out in this full sun, it will smash it. But they got half sun without, and I just kept feeding it until the point I could cut back to even twice a year if I forgot, but at least 3-4 times a year, and starting to grow understory plants with a bit more sun, so I can open up the areas that I was actually planting. Oh, I can't plant that there because it gets afternoon sun. Well, now I just go for it. So, question?
So you're talking about needing less water, but you mentioned vegetables as different. So
Sorry?
vegetables
Yep.
still needing water,
Yes.
but are you saying that if you grow it with the garden mate, that the vegetables would need less water?
Well, I could cut back to every second day. Now, the thing is, once again, this came back to my horticultural brain trying to get in my way, because I'd look at it and they're wilting, and I was like, oh, quick, run out with the water. As soon as the sun dipped, they all stood up again. So it was purely a defensive thing on that. If I went an extra day and they wilted, then they started to burn. But I managed to stretch it. So I was managed to stretch the water because my dam was getting low, it still is. So as much as I don't want a cyclone, I need the rain to top my dam up. So, yeah. Yeah, so, well, I shouldn't get any landslips. So if it's coming, get your garden out quick if you live on a slope. So yeah, quick go now. So yeah, any more questions? Yes.
Would the minerals be beneficial in a worm farm?
Yes, definitely beneficial in a worm farm. One thing I noticed, as I said about my property now, is there were no worms. They just weren't there. But since I started using the minerals, now I dig a hole and I'm getting half a dozen in a hole. So within 2 years, they're bringing in. And in my worm farm, I'll put a little bit down, just a light bit, because you've got to be careful with it, because it can be used like, what's that stuff they dust the chickens with? Diatomaceous earth. It can be used similar to that, because it does dry if it touches them directly. Like if they're in the hole and I put it in, you watch them squirming. It's like, oh, quick, get some water in. There you go, fella. So, you know, it does happen like that. So you do have to be careful in the worm farm. But I generally steer more for the Garden Delight because of the organic matter rather than the straight mineral. Yeah, so it's less, yeah, they like it more, put it that way. So once again, you're feeding that because then they can get the enzymes flowing in their gut, and they can break that compost down really, really well. Right, now, as I was saying, we'll do... Thank you for your attention, everybody. That was great.
Or you want to start with the bay leaf tree? Alrighty. So this one's going to be for the bay leaf tree.
So first number called is the bay tree.
Alright.
We have Red Sea 46.
Red Sea
Red
46.
Sea 46, David. Oh my gosh.
I'll bring it up.
Yeah, we'll need a water.
Oh.
Just give that a shot of water when you get home.
Okay, next one.
Now we're giving away Garden Delight for do a green one. That means you're late. Green C 16. In front. All right, we've got a bit of Garden Mate. We're going to Red C 64.
Oh,
In the corner.
beautiful. Thank you.
Anyone loves that orchid?
I won't walk up there again.
Red Sea 81. Red Sea 81.
There we go.
Yay! And we have some fruit blends. Who doesn't
fabulous,
have a
thank
fruit
you.
No
tree?
problem.
Try not to look. Red Sea number 2. That would have been the first in for the night. Good work. Thanks for getting here.
Do you have a fruit trees? Oh, if you didn't, you'd have to go and buy some then. Yeah. A lemon, perfect. See, what I was talking about too before with the grasshoppers, see, with my lemon tree, what I noticed the first year that the big grasshoppers came in, it took 90% of the foliage off. So I pumped the minerals into it, and the next year the big grasshoppers came in, they took 40% of the foliage. So they got that much through the leaf, and it started to affect the way they actually ate it, so they moved on. But the whole time it held the lemons and continued to, and I don't get citrus leaf miner anymore, I don't get gore wasp anymore, and I don't hardly get any harlequin bugs or the stink bugs. The only thing I get occasionally is a little outcropper aphids, which I just brush them off or hose them off, that's it. So, sorry? That's the stuff I threw on my pawpaws to make them fruit. So once that's the, I probably shouldn't say brands, but that's the Swiss multivitamin inside the balanced diet. Frangipanis, yeah, absolutely. So I'm having good success with, well, as in, you mean the rust on them? Yeah.
With red spider mite.
Red spider mite, absolutely, yeah. But the rust too, I mean, that's part of the breakdown process. It generally comes towards the end when it's about to drop the leaves. So it is a natural process, but you can minimise that with the extra fertiliser in it. Where I had really good results with myrtle rust as well. I've got plants which were nearly died. 3 years later, they're absolutely blooming. So I'm actually doing trials with someone who grows native plants and re-veg, and we're going to do trials for plants that are susceptible to myrtle rust for him as well. Might, yes, yeah. And, yep. Yeah. I said, go hard with it. It may not be, it probably wouldn't happen this year. You may still get it. Next year you'll find that it'll get stronger, you'll get less, and then within 3 years you should find that it's practically gone. Depends how heavy you go with it, but because the mites are sapsuckers, they're sucking that sugar out. If they can't get it, then they will not be able to feed properly. Gardener's pack, is it?
All right. We
Oh,
have a
gift certificate.
$50 Rosemount voucher,
Oh,
not to be sold. Red Sea 59.
ooh.
All right. We have another $50 voucher for a Red Sea 62. You're in cahoots.
Gardener's pack.
All right. Would you like to do that?
No, you.
Okay. The big gardener's pack, the prize of the night, the lucky door. Let's see. It's a Red Sea 98. Red Sea 98. Or is it 86? It's definitely 98. Oh!
Hey!
Thank you. Sorry.
Yes, thank you all for coming. Hope you got a bit of... so as I said in that, it's about myth busting. I mean, yeah, I've had a lot of, as I said, the indoctrinated dialogue of horticulture, which I learned back in the 90s, was based on technology from the 1800s. So we've moved on from that. It still does apply, but you know, you don't have to be a slave to it. So your plants don't have to be a slave to you. So that's why we promote the product the way we do. so you can enjoy your gardens better and bring the passion back, basically. So thank you.